In the memories of millions of American viewers, Little House on the Prairie was never just a TV show. It was a piece of their childhood. And at the heart of that memory stood Karen Grassle, the woman in a plain brown dress with a gentle smile and eyes that spoke more in silence than in words. As Ma Ingalls, she became the embodiment of the perfect mother, a symbol of kindness and the enduring spirit of old America. But behind that image, behind the tender smile that raised a generation of viewers, was a life marked by scars few ever saw. While the world hailed her as America's mother, Karen Grassle lived in solitude, facing injustice, prejudice, and the forced silence of the very industry that had built her fame. She was paid less than her male co-stars, had her lines cut for demanding fairness, and swallowed tears after enduring mockery on set. Yet Grassle never shouted for pity. She chose silence, chose to keep acting, and chose to preserve the dignity of a woman who refused to let anyone bend her pride. And then, more than half a century later, in her 80s, she finally spoke, not to complain, but to tell the truth. Her memoir, Bright Lights, Prairie Dust, did more than lift the curtain on a beloved show. It became a powerful confession about resilience, redemption, and forgiveness. This is the story of a woman who dared to stand between light and shadow, where role, fame, and pain intertwined like threads of one life. And if you ever believed gentleness was weakness, Karen Grassle's journey will make you think again. Karen Grassle was born on February 25, 1942, in Berkeley, California, into a family that seemed ordinary, but was, in truth, full of small miracles. Before her birth, her mother had endured 4 consecutive miscarriages. So when Karen finally arrived, the family saw her as the miracle child, the child born of patience and faith. Her father, Gene Grassle, ran a small gas station. Her mother, Frey Clark, managed a roadside restaurant. Life wasn't easy, but they gave their daughter everything they could. In an interview, Karen once said with a warm smile, "My parents worked so hard. We didn't have much, but we had each other." She grew up in Ventura, a quiet seaside town in Southern California, where the ocean breeze swept through the streets and everyone knew one another's name. Karen's childhood was filled with afternoons spent reading under soft sunlight and evenings singing in the small kitchen, while her parents tried to hide their financial worries so their daughter could dream like any other child. From an early age, Karen showed an extraordinary gift for the arts. She didn't just love performing, she possessed the discipline of an adult. At Ventura High School, she excelled in literature and drama, graduating in 1959 as valedictorian, a title that made her entire town proud. She went on to study English and drama at the University of California, Berkeley, intending at first to become a teacher. But deep inside, the stage lights still called to her. "If I don't try, I'll regret it for the rest of my life," she told herself, a promise that would change her destiny. After graduation, Karen received a full scholarship to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, RADA, in London, one of the most prestigious institutions in the world. There, the young American woman trained under strict discipline, standing for hours under the rehearsal lights, learning to deliver each line as if it were a prayer. Her years at RADA transformed her into a true artist, intelligent, sharp, and utterly disciplined. Yet when she returned to America, Karen discovered a harsh truth. Talent alone was not enough to survive in the arts. In 1968, she made her Broadway debut in The Gingham Dog, but the show was canceled after only a few days, leaving her with nothing but debt and a suitcase full of disappointment. She refused to give up. Karen kept touring with small theater groups, performing wherever a stage existed, even in old churches or local bars. When things seemed hopeless, she made a desperate move. She changed her stage name to Kay Dillinger, claiming to be the illegitimate daughter of the notorious bank robber John Dillinger. It was a wild stunt to get noticed, but no one cared. Broadway turned its back, and she was left exhausted and broke. In the years that followed, Karen returned to her parents' home, sleeping on their couch and wondering if her dream had come to an end. One winter afternoon, she wrote in her journal, "I thought maybe this dream wasn't meant for me after all." What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that a single phone call would soon change everything. A call that would transform an unemployed actress into one of the most beloved figures in American television. Sometimes destiny doesn't arrive with applause, but with the quiet ring of a phone on an afternoon of despair. After the difficult years on the Broadway stage, Karen Grassle still refused to give up. She kept joining small theater troupes, taking any role she could just to keep her passion alive. In 1970, she appeared in Cymbeline at the New York Shakespeare Festival, a gathering of young, passionate actors, most of whom were still unknown. On an outdoor stage under dim lights, Karen delivered her lines with all her heart, as if it were her last chance in life. In the years that followed, she remained devoted to theater, living on modest pay but with unshaken dignity. In a rare interview, she said softly, "Theater was my first love. No matter how hard life became, I couldn't let it go." But as time passed and leading roles grew scarce, her hope began to fade. At 32, after nearly a decade of struggling in the craft, Karen considered returning to teaching, the path her parents had once dreamed for her. She wrote in her journal, "I thought maybe the dream had run its course." And then, destiny knocked. One day in early 1974, Karen received a phone call from an NBC representative. They were looking for an actress for a new television series based on Laura Ingalls Wilder's books, Little House on the Prairie. The role was Caroline Ingalls, the steadfast mother of a pioneer family in 19th century America. When Karen arrived at the audition, she had little expectation left. She wore a faded gray wool dress, so old the threads came loose at the seams, slightly worn shoes, and no makeup. Not because she wanted to appear authentic, but because she couldn't afford to pretend otherwise. A friend from the studio had advised her, "Keep it simple, that's who she is." And Karen believed it. When she stepped into the room, the spotlight fell across her thin but serene face. At the head of the table sat Michael Landon, director, writer, and lead actor, silent and observant. He was known for being strict and unpredictable and had already rejected more than 40 actresses. Karen held the script, her hands trembling slightly. When she finished the first reading, the room fell completely silent. She didn't cry or overact. She simply spoke as a mother trying to keep her family together through life's storms. When she stopped, Landon looked up, squinted, and suddenly stood. "Get her to wardrobe and makeup," he said, almost as a command. No one understood what had just happened, only that Michael Landon had found his Caroline Ingalls. Out of more than 40 candidates, Karen Grassle was chosen, not for fame, but for something Hollywood rarely values: authenticity. She later wrote in her memoir, Bright Lights, Prairie Dust, "I drew inspiration from my mother, a woman of quiet strength and endless patience." The role of Caroline "Ma" Ingalls opened the most glorious chapter of her career. When Little House on the Prairie premiered in 1974, audiences across America were captivated by the world of the Ingalls family, a world of simplicity, love, and survival. The series ran for nearly a decade, winning 3 Emmy Awards and countless nominations, becoming a cornerstone of American family television. Caroline quickly became the heart of the show. When Charles, Michael Landon, faltered under hardship, it was Caroline who stood firm, raising children, plowing fields, building homes, and holding fragile hopes together. The press called her the moral backbone of the Prairie family. Michael Landon himself admitted in a 1978 interview, "She's the glue that holds the Ingalls family together." On screen, Caroline embodied kindness, endurance, and sacrifice, the mother figure America longed to see in itself. But behind the camera, Karen Grassle lived in a very different world, one where fame did not come with fairness, and the spotlight illuminated only one side of the truth. In her memoir, she wrote, "People thought I was living that perfect life they saw on TV, but inside I was crumbling. The public saw a perfect mother. Karen, in reality, was a woman slowly losing herself in a cold, unforgiving Hollywood. Amid applause and acclaim, she didn't realize that the role that made her famous was also the invisible cage that would imprison her for years to come. That light didn't just shine on her career, it began to burn through her life." The success of Little House on the Prairie was a whirlwind no one anticipated. Within a few years, audiences across America loved the Ingalls family as if they were their own. Each episode felt like an emotional reunion, laughter and tears intertwined. Yet amid the sweet intoxication of fame, Karen began to notice something was wrong. While the show generated millions for NBC and elevated Michael Landon to stardom, Grassle's salary remained shockingly low. She didn't complain out of greed, but out of fairness. "I didn't want more than I deserved," she wrote. "I just wanted to be paid fairly for the work I was doing." When Karen asked for a raise, Michael Landon, the man she had respected as a colleague and director, flatly refused. He reportedly told her she was worth no more than the child actors, a remark that shattered her. In an interview, Grassle recalled, "It was humiliating to realize that the man you trusted didn't see your worth. That broke my heart." From then on, their relationship fractured beyond repair. Landon began cutting her screen time, trimming her dialogue, and during playback sessions, he would mock her expressions or gestures in front of the crew. No one dared speak up. On set, the woman who had once been the soul of the series slowly became an outsider. She wrote, "Mike would make crude jokes, sometimes right before a scene where we were supposed to play a tender moment. I felt trapped in a power game I could never win." Once during a break, Landon made vulgar jokes about women right in front of her. Karen kept her composure, but inside, she felt like disappearing. Later, when she was offered the lead in The Boy in the Plastic Bubble, Landon blocked it, citing scheduling conflicts, though in truth he didn't want her to shine beyond his show. "I was trapped," she wrote. "If I quit, I'd be labeled difficult, and no one in Hollywood would hire me again." At that time, women who spoke up were branded and cast aside. Karen knew it well. She chose silence, swallowing her pain and continuing to perform, even as each scene became a battle within herself. And in that silence, a crack began to form inside her. Amid the laughter on screen and the praise of it, Karen Grassle began losing the most precious thing of all, herself. To fill the emptiness, she turned to the only thing that could quiet her mind: alcohol. No one knew that while America's mother was pouring tea for her family on screen, those same hands were trembling as they poured another glass for herself. "In bright lights, prairie dust," she admitted. "I drank to forget how small I felt every day." Coming from a family with a history of addiction, Karen knew how destructive alcohol could be, yet she sought it anyway, as a way to numb the pain. The first drink calmed her mind, the second helped her forget, and by the third, she no longer knew who she was. Each morning, she arrived on set exhausted, eyes swollen, yet still had to embody the perfect mother, Ma Ingalls, the image of grace and compassion. "No one knew that under Ma's smile, I was hiding a storm," she wrote. That pretense lasted until she lost the boundary between her life and her character. The breaking point came with a brief affair with actor Gilbert, a guest star on the show. In her loneliness and pain, Karen sought solace in him. But after their breakup, Gerard called to tell her she might have contracted a sexually transmitted disease, gonorrhea. The news was the final blow. Karen later wrote that she felt disgusted with myself. She avoided colleagues, withdrew, and carried her shame in silence. Everything seemed to be spinning out of control. Then one day, while drinking with a friend, that friend looked her in the eye and said, "Karen, I'm an alcoholic, and I think you are too." One sentence, like a slap across the denial she had clung to for so long. For the first time, Karen sat in silence, then cried. Not out of shame, but because she realized she was repeating her parents' tragedy. In 1977, at the age of 35, Karen Grassle began her journey to sobriety, not through glamour, but through long, trembling nights of facing her inner demons. And she won. Since then, she has remained sober for more than 45 years, a vow never to betray herself again. "Sobriety didn't just save my life," she said. "It gave me back my soul." Sobriety helped Karen reclaim herself, but it also forced her to confront what was left unresolved, her past, forgiveness, and the man who had hurt her most, Michael Landon. No one expected that just as Karen Grassle found peace again, fate would lead her back to face the man who once caused her so much pain, not on set, but at his bedside. After years of living in loneliness and self-contempt, Karen Grassle entered a new chapter. Quiet, unglamorous, but full of courage. "Sobriety didn't make my life easy," she once said. "It made it real." She had stopped drinking, kept her promise to herself, and now all she needed was a place to begin again, a stage, a role, a breath of renewal. In 1981, she appeared in the independent film Harry's War, directed by Keith Merrill. Karen's role was small, appearing only briefly amid scenes of war and memory, but critics noticed the way she acted through silence. With nothing more than her eyes, she conveyed the grief of a woman who had lost her husband, her faith, yet still clung to the last traces of humanity within her. It was the kind of role only someone who had truly suffered could play authentically. And at that moment, Karen was no longer acting. She was living the part. But instead of chasing Hollywood again, Karen chose to return to the purest form of her art, theater. When Little House on the Prairie ended in 1983, she knew that chapter of her life had closed. She moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, a land of sunlight and sand, where art and spirituality coexist, to start over. There, she founded the Resource Theater Company, a small but ambitious troupe. No stars, no grand stage lights, just a few young actors, some worn props, and a shared belief that theater could heal the wounds of life. Karen wasn't just the founder, she was the soul of the group. She directed and performed in numerous plays, including Driving Miss Daisy, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, The Glass Menagerie, The Taming of the Shrew, and Cabaret. Each role became a new layer of self-discovery for Karen. In Driving Miss Daisy, she portrayed Miss Daisy, a wealthy, stubborn woman who slowly learns compassion. Karen played her with a gaze both cold and tender, as if she herself were learning to forgive Michael Landon, the past, and even herself. In Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, she became Big Mama, a mother torn between love and fear, living in a house full of secrets and resentment. Her performance left Santa Fe audiences breathless. A local critic wrote, "Grassle doesn't act Big Mama, she becomes her." In The Glass Menagerie, she embodied Amanda Wingfield, a mother haunted by illusions and memories. Karen once shared, "Amanda's pain felt so familiar. She keeps pretending everything's fine because that's all she knows how to do." The audience knew she wasn't only speaking about the character, she was speaking about herself. For each play, Karen personally designed costumes, arranged the stage, and taught young actors how to breathe with the character. She said, "Theater saved me. It gave me back my voice after years of silence." From 1984 to 1990, she devoted herself completely to the stage. There was no press, no fame, only the sound of her heels echoing on wooden floors and the musty scent of backstage curtains. Karen also taught acting in centers across New Mexico and California, giving her students what she herself had once lacked: empathy and respect for women in the craft. One of her students recalled, "She taught us that acting isn't about showing, it's about feeling truth." Then, in 1994, after nearly a decade away from the screen, Karen made a quiet return to film in Wyatt Earp, directed by Lawrence Kasdan and starring Kevin Costner. It was a small part, a frontier woman watching the world change. But for Karen, it was her first time back on set without fear. After everything, she was no longer the silenced woman she once was, but a free artist, standing before the camera with confidence, needing no one's permission to be herself. "Acting never left me," she said. "It just waited for me to be brave enough to come back." Her success was modest, but it helped Karen Grassle rediscover her true worth, not through television fame, but through small roles and nights of performing for only a few dozen people. Yet just as her career began to find its rhythm again, her personal life entered a new set of trials, where love, marriage, and loneliness came knocking together. On stage, she always knew how to save a broken line. But in real life, not every play allows for a second take. From 1997 to 2010, she worked tirelessly in small plays and independent films, where actors had to handle everything: costumes, lighting, even setting up chairs for the audience. The glory of Ma Ingalls was long gone, but for Karen, it was in that simplicity that she felt truly alive. During this period, she also became a passionate advocate for gender equality and domestic violence awareness. In her talks, her voice was soft but unwavering. "We can't change what hurt us, but we can change what happens next." She traveled to women's centers, churches, and universities, sharing her own story of a woman once humiliated, once silent, once addicted, who still found the strength to stand again. For Karen, telling her pain was never about seeking pity. It was about giving others power. In 2012, she returned to television in the Hallmark film My Greatest Teacher, the story of a teacher whose compassion transforms the life of a troubled student. The role reflected her own gentle spirit, a woman who had learned forgiveness, even toward those who had caused her pain. Then in 2017, Karen surprised audiences once more with her appearance in the horror western Lasso. At 75, she played an elderly woman trapped in a violent desert, a haunting symbol of her own resilience. Critics wrote, "Karen Grassle still carries that calm power, the kind that silences a room without saying a word." After years of struggling to prove herself on the Broadway stage, Karen Grassle once believed that love could be a refuge from the storms of art. It was the early 1960s, when she was still a young actress fresh out of college, full of dreams about becoming a star, and a heart still untouched by the world's harshness. During an audition in New York, Karen met Leon Russum, a fellow young actor with the same ambitions, deep eyes, a warm voice, and a smile that made her feel both safe and intrigued. They met while working together on a small off-Broadway production. At the time, Karen was still taking minor roles, while Leon was just beginning to get noticed. The two found in each other a companion in the unforgiving world of show business. They shared late-night dinners after rehearsals, stayed up reading scripts together, and dreamed of a future where they would perform on the same stage, not as lovers in a play, but as leads in the story of their own lives. In 1966, Karen and Leon married, a wedding so modest it didn't even include a traditional dress. Friends recalled that the ceremony took place in their small Manhattan apartment, surrounded by a handful of fellow artists. But for Karen, that was enough. She once told a friend, "We didn't have money, but we had dreams, and that felt enough." The early days of marriage were a mix of love and poverty. Two young actors trying to keep their passion alive while worrying about every bill and every meal. They lived in a tiny attic apartment that doubled as a bedroom, a rehearsal space, and a costume closet. On cold nights, they would wrap themselves in one blanket, read Tennessee Williams plays aloud, and laugh as the wind whistled through the cracked window. They didn't have much, but they believed in each other, at least until life began demanding more than dreams could provide. Leon started getting more roles in television and theater, while Karen, despite her RADA training, still struggled to land substantial work. The gap between them widened. As one soared, the other began to feel left behind. Karen later admitted, "He was getting recognition, and I was still struggling to pay rent. I loved him, but I began to feel invisible." The tension didn't just come from career differences, but from personality contrasts. Leon was outgoing and assertive. Karen was sensitive, perfectionist, and easily wounded. He loved socializing and parties. She preferred quiet nights with poetry or jazz. They began living at different tempos, two actors performing in two separate plays under the same roof. By the early 1970s, when Karen was offered the audition for Little House on the Prairie, their marriage was already on shaky ground. She poured all her energy into work, while Leon felt increasingly pushed out of her world. They tried to hold on, but the silence between them thickened like a cold mist. The marriage lasted only 4 years, but it taught Karen one of life's hardest truths. Sometimes love isn't enough when two people are still trying to find themselves. In 1970, they divorced quietly. No disputes, no bitterness. Karen left with no children, a few savings, and a heart full of bittersweet memories. Years later, she told TV Guide, "Leon was my first home, but I think I moved in too early." The divorce didn't break her, but it left behind a fear of attachment. She threw herself into work, chasing roles as if they were escape routes from emptiness. Yet some nights, in the stillness of a studio or theater, she swore she could still hear Leon's laughter, the sound of a chapter in her life she knew would never return. Her first marriage ended quietly, but the crack it left inside her never fully healed. And just when Karen thought she had learned how to love with less pain, fate led her into another relationship, one that brought both tenderness and turmoil under the same roof. He wasn't an actor or a star, but a man from outside the entertainment world, seemingly calm and grounded. Yet it was that very calmness that became a double-edged sword, leaving Karen Grassle once again lost between love and loneliness. When Little House on the Prairie ended in 1983, Karen Grassle walked off the set feeling both relieved and empty. After nearly a decade embodying Caroline Ingalls, the resilient, selfless mother who held her family together, she suddenly realized that she had never truly had a home of her own. It was in that void that James Radford appeared. Not an actor, not part of Hollywood, but an ordinary man who worked in real estate. He was polite, calm, and carried the composure of someone who had seen much of life. After years surrounded by performers and egos, Karen found Radford refreshingly different, simple, grounded, and unpretentious. They met through a mutual friend at an art exhibition in California. Karen was in her early 40s, and James, a few years older, was divorced and living a stable life. His steadiness made her feel safe. "For once, I didn't have to explain who I was," she recalled in a later interview. "He saw me as Karen, not as Ma Ingalls." Their love was quiet. It arrived in the form of late afternoon walks by the beach, cups of coffee shared in silence, and conversations about small but genuine things. In 1982, they married in a private ceremony, attended only by close family and friends. After nearly 20 years of living on film sets, it was the first time Karen felt that her real life was finally beginning. 2 years later, they adopted a baby girl, the child Karen would call the belated gift of destiny. In several interviews, she said that moment changed everything. "I always played a mother on screen, but holding her in my arms, that was the first time I felt like one." The little family settled in Santa Fe, in a cozy house overlooking the mountains. Karen stepped away from television, devoting herself to theater and teaching acting. Their life seemed peaceful, until the quiet differences between art and ordinary life began to show. James Radford was a man of structure and planning, while Karen was a woman of emotion. He was fluent in numbers, she lived in words. He valued certainty, she needed creative freedom. At first, those contrasts attracted them, but over time they became barriers. Karen once wrote in her journal, "He loved me, but he didn't understand the noise inside my head." She began to feel lonely inside her own home, a cruel irony for someone who had spent her life dreaming of family happiness. By 1986, as Karen's stage career began to flourish again, James wanted her to spend more time at home. But she felt alive only when performing. They tried to compromise, but the distance between them kept widening. The greatest conflict came when Karen started touring with theater productions. James felt abandoned, while she felt confined. They still loved each other, but love had become a burden between two people chasing different dreams. Finally, in 1987, they divorced quietly. No scandal, no lawsuits, just two weary people choosing to part before hurting each other further. Karen kept custody of their adopted daughter. "The only reason I stayed strong," as she later said. Years later, when asked if she regretted the marriage, Karen smiled gently. "No. We weren't meant to last forever. We were meant to help each other heal." But fate, it seemed, wasn't finished with her. Just when she believed she had found peace beside her little girl, Karen opened her heart once more, stepping into a third marriage where love arrived late, only to fade quietly. The man wasn't a celebrity, nor someone who had ever hurt her before. He was the kind of man who made her believe maybe this time would be different. Yet, as life would prove again, even the kindest people can break your heart. Gently. After two failed marriages, Karen Grassle no longer believed in forever. Nearing 50, she no longer longed for passion or promises, only for companionship, someone calm enough to listen, patient enough to stay, and warm enough to make her believe that happiness wasn't a privilege reserved for the young. Scott Sutherland entered her life in that quiet season. He was an intellectual, a man working in policy and communications, soft-spoken, thoughtful, and quietly observant. They met in 1990 at a theater seminar in California, where Karen was invited to speak about acting, and Scott attended with a group of friends. There were no stage lights, no glamour, just two middle-aged souls talking about art, youth, and the years that had passed. Karen later said, "He didn't know much about Hollywood, and that was such a relief." For the first time in years, she felt she could talk without performing. She didn't have to be Karen Grassle, television star, but simply a woman trying to find herself again. Their affection grew out of quiet understanding. They exchanged handwritten letters, went to plays, walked along the beach, and shared their favorite books. Scott understood her past wounds but never tried to fix them. He simply stayed, listening with gentle patience. In 1991, they married in a small ceremony in Santa Fe, where Karen was living with her adopted daughter. The early years of their marriage were some of the few truly peaceful times in Karen's life. They gardened together, read scripts together, and watched sunsets from their porch. There were no audiences, no tours, just the breeze and the scent of lavender drifting through the evenings. "Scott was my safe harbor," she said. The calm after all her storms. But even safe harbors can change with the tide. When Karen turned 50, the fire of the stage began to stir in her again. She accepted roles in Driving Miss Daisy and The Glass Menagerie, later joining short touring productions. The return to acting made her feel alive again, but it also began to widen the space between them. Scott had fallen in love with a peaceful woman, but Karen was still an artist, someone who could not live in silence for too long. Small misunderstandings slowly became real distance. Her long absences on tour, the renewed press attention, and Scott's quiet fatigue at being left outside a world that never quite included him. Karen understood, and once said a line that many would later remember. Living with an artist means sharing them with the world. In the end, their love, however sincere, could not withstand time and difference. In 1997, they divorced quietly, without anger or noise. It was simply two people realizing that loving each other didn't mean they had to stay forever. Karen left with her daughter and their shared memories, carrying gratitude instead of regret. Later, she reflected, "It wasn't a failure. It was a season, beautiful, necessary, and meant to end." Her marriage to Scott Sutherland closed like the final gentle pause in the love story of Karen Grassle's life. There were no tears, no dramatic endings, only acceptance. She stayed in touch with him, and years later still referred to him as a kind man who loved me the way I needed to be loved then. After that, Karen never married again. She chose to live with her daughter, write plays, engage in social causes, and advocate for women facing domestic violence. When asked if she ever felt lonely, she smiled and said, "No, I have peace. And peace is a better company than love that hurts." Karen Grassle's life passed through 3 great loves and 3 great losses. Yet instead of bitterness, she found serenity. And within that serenity, she discovered a different kind of happiness, the kind that comes from having lived enough to understand that sometimes peace is worth more than love. Ironically, it was only when she stopped searching for love that the world began to love her again, not for her beauty or fame, but for her courage to live truthfully in a world that once forced her to act for too long. After her separation from Scott Sutherland, Karen Grassle seemed to close every door leading back to the past. She taught, wrote plays, lived with her daughter, and devoted much of her time to social causes. Life became unusually calm, a kind of peace she had once believed existed only in movies. Yet some wounds, even after they stopped bleeding, remain deep within memory. And for Karen, that wound bore a name: Michael Landon. For years after Little House on the Prairie, she rarely mentioned him. No resentment, no defense, just the silence of someone who had endured too much. But as she passed 50, Karen realized that something inside her was still unresolved. Silence, she came to understand, was not forgiveness. It was only a gentler form of captivity. In the late 1980s, when she learned that Michael Landon had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, Karen was stunned. The man who had once wounded her, who had driven her to addiction and isolation, was now facing the harshest sentence of all: mortality. She once said that in the years following the show, her bitterness toward Landon had felt like a stone lodged in her chest. Impossible to forget, but impossible to release. She never spoke publicly against him, never sought revenge, but the scars remained, silent, heavy, and unresolved. One day, Karen sat down, took out paper and pen, and wrote a letter. It wasn't long, nor bitter, nor did it revisit the quarrels or sarcasm of the past. It was just a few simple lines, words of gratitude for the opportunity he had given her, and a wish for peace for the man who had once brought her to the screen. A mutual acquaintance later confirmed. When Landon read the letter, he wept. Karen never shared the contents of that letter until more than 30 years later, when she wrote her memoir. She called it "The Letter That Closed a Wound." In an interview, she reflected, "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about setting down the weight you've carried too long." In 2021, her memoir, Bright Lights, Prairie Dust, Reflections on Life, Loss, and Love from Little House's Ma, was published, not as an accusation, but as a journey of healing. She recounted her lonely childhood, her battle with alcoholism, her conflicts with Landon, and her long path toward reclaiming her own voice. a voice once buried beneath applause and polite praise. The book sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Many were stunned to learn that the gentle mother they had adored on screen had endured such isolation, humiliation, and emotional pain. The press called her the woman who spoke softly but finally spoke her truth. After the memoir's release, several former colleagues confirmed that Michael Landon indeed had a volatile temperament, brilliant yet cutting, a genius not easy to love. One of them said, "He was brilliant, but not easy to love." Still, Karen never called for anyone to cancel or condemn him. She simply wanted people to understand that art is born from humanity, and humanity is complicated. She forgave him not because he deserved it, but because she needed to be free of the pain. And so, in her 70s, when most people retreat into quiet, Karen Grassle stepped into the light again, freer, gentler, and truer than ever before. After Bright Lights, Prairie Dust became a bestseller, Karen didn't attempt a Hollywood comeback. Instead, she chose a quieter, more meaningful path. In later interviews, she often said that what made her happiest wasn't recognition, but doing something that still matters, even just once more. That same year, 2021, she appeared in the independent film Not to Forget, a special project created to raise funds for the Alzheimer's Association. The movie told the story of a young man caring for his grandmother with dementia, and Karen played a compassionate neighbor, a small role, yet filled with tenderness and humanity. Behind the scenes, she shared, "I took the role because it reminded me that compassion never retires." Viewers saw not only a veteran actress, but a woman who had endured loss and understood the meaning of remembering and forgetting. 3 years later, in 2024, as Little House on the Prairie celebrated its 50th anniversary, Karen reunited on stage with co-stars Melissa Gilbert, Laura Ingalls, and Allison Arngrim, Nellie Olson. The three women embraced amid thunderous applause. Karen reminisced about the old wool dress, her first audition, and the moment Michael Landon shouted, "Get her to wardrobe and makeup." But this time, her voice didn't tremble. It was warm, steady, filled with gratitude rather than regret. The Los Angeles Times described the reunion as a homecoming 50 years in the making. By 2025, Karen Grassle was 83 years old. She lived with her adopted daughter Lily in a small, sunlit house in Pacific Palisades, California, a balcony full of lavender, which she often called the scent of memory. She no longer acted regularly, appearing only occasionally at fan events or small community theaters. For Karen, the stage was no longer a place to be admired, but a place to share, to remember, and to simply feel alive. When asked in a recent interview if she had any regrets, she smiled and said, "No, I don't. I've lived every chapter. Some were dark, but all were mine." Half a century after Little House on the Prairie first introduced a kind and resilient America, Karen Grassle remains, the last living symbol of that pure era of television. She is no longer Ma Ingalls to millions. She is herself, a woman who has weathered storms, learned to forgive, to love, and to let go. And strangely enough, even as Karen quietly stepped away from the spotlight, audiences never stopped loving her, as if, in the hearts of viewers, that little house still stands. And the kind mother still smiles beneath the golden prairie sun. Nearly 50 years since the show first aired, the light of Little House on the Prairie has never gone out. Its stories of kindness, family, and endurance continue to resonate with audiences worldwide as a cherished emotional legacy. According to Nielsen Media Research, in 2024 alone, the series accumulated 13.25 billion minutes of viewing time on Peacock, a rare achievement for a show born nearly half a century ago. In Walnut Grove, Minnesota, the fictional town that became the show's iconic setting, the Laura Ingalls Wilder Museum still welcomes more than 10,000 visitors each year, people seeking the origin of their memories. On the souvenir shelves, the image of Ma Ingalls, her hair in a bun, her eyes gentle and kind, remains one of the most beloved emblems, a tribute to Karen Grassle, the woman who gave that character life. Now, at 83, Karen Grassle continues to live quietly with her daughter Lily in her Pacific Palisades home. She occasionally appears at fan gatherings or small local productions, not for fame, but for her enduring love of the stage. Surrounded by sunlight and the Pacific breeze, Karen writes, reads scripts, tends to her flowers, and talks with Lily, living the simple life she had once dreamed of in her youth. In a recent interview, when asked what the role of Caroline Ingalls meant to her, she smiled softly and said, "Caroline Ingalls isn't just a role. It's the greatest legacy of my life." And perhaps, in that serenity, Karen Grassle finally found what she had been searching for all along, a peace that doesn't come from the spotlight, but from knowing she lived fully, for both art and kindness. Karen Grassle's life stands as proof that true light doesn't come from fame, but from how one rises after the unthinkable and learns to forgive. She never lived to be remembered as a star. She lived to show that compassion can survive in a world often ruled by cruelty and noise. When audiences look back at Little House on the Prairie, they no longer see just a gentle mother on the American frontier. They see a real woman, fragile yet brave, hurt yet loving. And that choice, to love instead of hate, is what made Karen Grassle unforgettable. She didn't vanish. She simply stepped aside, letting the light fall on what mattered most: compassion, resilience, and dignity. In a Hollywood that constantly changes, perhaps the values she left behind are the rarest things that will never fade. And now, when you think of Ma Ingalls, take a moment to ask yourself, how have we treated the gentle souls in our own lives? If Karen Grassle's journey, a woman who turned pain into understanding, has touched your heart, leave a comment below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel, as we continue to tell real stories of those who lived difficult but truly beautiful lives.